Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel and welcome to this week's video. Now to get started, we're diving right back into watercolor, but before I start with this tutorial, I just wanted to say that I have finally started a shop on my website. It's a website that I have made and I have my originals for sale. I have prints available. I have my Inktober zines up there. All of the Inktober originals are already listed and I have a ton of watercolor artwork for you to check out. I will continue to update it and have new items like stickers and stuff available, and I'll make sure to do a whole video that kind of details all of those updates at a later time. And one last thing, I was thinking of doing some longer form tutorials on another platform. I would love to know if there's any interest in that. I know that with YouTube, most people prefer their videos to be relatively short, so for those of you who would like a little bit more and would like some longer form videos and some more in-depth courses, I would love to start something like that, and if you're interested, just let me know. So we are finally getting into this painting, and to start off with the crust, I did a really light mix of yellow ochre. I have it with a little bit of burnt sienna just to kind of warm it up a little bit, but I wanted it to stay really kind of muted since it was covering almost the entire thing. And then once that dried, I went in, I had yellow ochre mixed with a little bit of nickel quinacridone gold. I really wanted that to be warm, and I was paying attention to the shadows within my pie painting, and also do the same thing on my crust. Pay attention to where the light and shadow was and also where some of those more golden areas were. But as you can see, I'm being really rough with it. These are just the first layers and I'm not being all that careful with any of it because I know I'm going to refine it later on. And then once that layer dried, I started going in with a little bit of burnt sienna and some yellow ochre and nickel quinacridone gold and just kind of played with those levels, mixing it as I go. And I'm really just taking my paint and dotting in those little bits of detail like the nooks and crannies, the little bits that are going to be burnt from the oven, and really focusing on some of the shadows too. And I take care to do that throughout all of the sections, but I do have to say that since I do work from a few different references, and if you're curious about how I pick references, some of the things that I look for, how and why I pick them, just anything regarding references, if you're interested in that, let me know and I can make a video talking about it because I have had some questions about it, especially through Inktober. But I really try to pay attention to my reference photos and see where I wanted all of those shadows to be. And then once that dried, I start going in and kind of refining that. I'm taking some smaller brushes. As you can see, I started with something larger. I believe it was a 6. And now I'm going in with a number 2 and I'm starting to just stipple in that detail. And I'm using a lot of the colors that I've already listed and I'm mixing them with things like sepia and dioxazine violet, some reds, some oranges, and really trying to get a lot of diversity within these different sections. And at first you'll see that I'm really jumping around a lot and I had a hard time with that. Like I said, I work from a few different reference photos and I really was kind of getting lost on what sections I was pulling from and drawing inspiration from, what I was trying to develop, and just like what sections I was on, since a pie crust can be so different throughout the entire process that I really didn't want to have each section look exactly the same. I didn't want to draw inspiration from the same segment over and over again. That was something that I really wanted to kind of focus on, and I had to kind of take a step back and go in with each section a little bit more deliberately. And you can see that just paying attention to where the shadows are, what sections are going to be raised or burnt, which ones are a little bit more golden, what's darker, and I try to stick with the same couple sections, going back and forth between all of them and keeping them manageable and allowing those areas to dry in between. That was really important to me since I wanted the texture in it to be more distinct and not watercolor-esque once it was dried. I also started to think that it was looking kind of funny to my eye. I wanted something to give it a little bit more weight as a reference point. So I started filling in these little intersections of where the pie filling was. In my mind, this is more of like an apple pie, but there was just so much shadow within these pieces that it ended up being really dark, and I personally like that. I think it looked really nice, but sometimes when you're painting and you are seeing it against this white background, it can kind of mess with our perceptions of how we're seeing things. So I wanted to just kind of give that color reference for my eyes to pull from as I go through and I start darkening other things and pulling out those highlights and shadows within the piece. As you'll see, I just keep doing that throughout the entire painting. A lot of this was pretty repetitive, and I just really wanted to take my time with it. So as I'm going through and I am rendering all of this, you can see that I'm still sticking in relatively small sections, and I'm darkening certain areas as I go. As I start to darken some of those inner sections, I did want to use a bit of a mix. I didn't want it to be completely dark and black, so I used some different shades and really played around with the lighting and shadow in there. You can see that there's a little bit of variation to the color within it, and I work on adding some of the shadows around where the pie crust is and how it layers over the lattice part of the pie, and also darkening up the sections of the actual filling part as I'm going. And with some of these, you can see that I'm doing like a wet on wet style, and I'm really trying to let those intersections flow and just have their own color variation within them. And like I said, this is one of those paintings where I'm thinking of maybe turning it into a longer form video, whether it is the full painting of it in real time. This is a longer painting. It probably took me close to 3 hours. So something that would be a longer form tutorial I might do, or like a real-time painting tutorial. I personally like those. I like having other paintings kind of going on in the background while I'm painting. I don't know, perhaps I'm just kind of quirky like that, but I think that's a lot of fun. So if you're interested in anything like that, let me know, because I'd really like to know. I would like to do something like that. I've been looking into different things like Patreon and Teachable and Skillshare. I do feel like for me and the kind of content and courses and things I would like to offer, I feel like Patreon is a better fit. I would like to be able to offer different courses to all of you guys, different quick tips behind the scenes, offer things that I'm working on, and also offer different incentives that I just couldn't do on another platform. I would love to know your thoughts, and if that's something that you would like to see, I'd also love to know like what kind of incentives that you would be interested in seeing. Now, once I get to a point where I'm pretty happy with how my pie crust is looking, I wanted to get started on the little Pyrex dish that it is sitting in. And for that, I started with some anthracnone blue. I used some Payne's Gray and dioxazine violet. And I started off with just a really light mix of my anthracnone blue and a little bit of Payne's Gray. And I wanted to do a really light mixture. Keep in mind when you're doing that first layer, you're kind of sticking to whatever is that lightest value and what essentially the highlights were going to be. And then once that had dried, I wanted to go in and focus on the different lighting and shadow elements that are within this. I actually really love painting glass. There's so many different dynamics that are within it that you can kind of catch. So working on the shadows in the handle and where that really thick glass line is on the outer edge, and using a really concentrated mix of my anthracnone blue and my Payne's Gray and a really concentrated mix of dioxazine violet in some cases. And as I'm waiting for the Pyrex dish to dry in between layers, I'm going in and I'm just kind of fixing some areas as my eye picks up on things. I felt like the outer edge, the outer crust of the pie was something that I didn't develop exceedingly well, so I did go through and work on that a little bit while the dish was drying. And then I'm just going through and I'm adding some darker areas, darkening up the base of the handle, the little bits of light, or shadow rather, towards the end of the handles, the darker area around the edge of the glass, and just some of those little spots that show some darkness. And just by adding those darker layers around it, you're essentially creating these little highlights within it as well. I am someone who tries to keep in as many natural highlights when I'm painting as I can, but I'm not against going in with something like a white colored pencil, watercolor pencil, or even a gel pen or a white ink or something like that. If you're curious what my favorite brand of gel pen is, it is the Uniball Signo. I swear by that. It is the best white gel pen, and I have used them for a really long time. Like, I have very few problems with them, so that would be my recommendation. I have that link down below if you're interested. However, I didn't use that in this drawing. And I did go through and just add some darker areas around the pie crust just to add some shadow and some depth, and to show that it is kind of lifted up off of that glass surface a little bit. And then just these little tiny markings that just kind of showed shadow and markings within the glass and some different shadow variations within it. And I spent a lot of time working on the handle because that had a lot more shadows than the rest of the pan. For the Pyrex dish, I did use a few more reference photos just to try to get some of that depth and shadow that I wanted to get in it, to see the different variations, because you do have these different like ridges and stuff in some of the glass dishes that you'll find. So playing with that and the different shadows that it creates was important to me. And then once I felt like that was where I wanted it to, and I had touched up the different areas that I wanted to of the pie, I went in really quickly with a micron pen and I just added a couple of tiny little lines and dots and just cleaned up some edges and just added these very small amounts of black to my painting. I know a lot of people will say not to use black in watercolor. I am not one of them, and I did use some black watercolor paint within this. I think that you use whatever color that you want, whenever you want, follow whatever you feel is best for the look that you want, and just have fun with it and don't listen to anyone who tells you they can't. So that is all for this tutorial and for this video. I hope that you loved it. I hope you're excited to get back into some watercolor tutorials, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!